if there was a nuclear fallout and people were only using like AM radio waves to communicate, I could probably be like, you know what, one time. Yeah, this is going into woo territory.
I know. Well, and it kind of should. But, if we did dismiss things that sounded outlandish and just never bothered, well, we wouldn't have airplanes. We wouldn't have spacecraft. We wouldn't have computers. A time traveling minivan that could go back 1,000 years, and we stuffed it full of all the shit that we have today, like all the coolest things. And we went back 1,000 years. We would be gods. We'd be indistinguishable from gods.
I don't know a lot of minivans that can hit 88 miles per hour.
The fuck? Are you some kind of like ninja? Like, how did you do that? And from that moment on, like, he totally respected me. Like I did something totally impossible.
Enable program deep sea diving.
All right, everybody, welcome to another kitchen sink microscopy episode. I'm Eric Rosenblatt, and we'd love it if you'd like and share this video. Subscribe, of course. You're already subscribed. Leave a comment down there. Definitely, this will be a good one, I think. Yeah.
And if you're already subscribed, unsubscribe and then subscribe again. Why not? Stick around to the end because we write our own music, and there's a super cool song hanging way at the dingleberry of the episode. Maybe that's that's not really a euphemism.
Well, if it isn't, it is now. You just coined it.
It's better than a dingleberry. Let's put it that way. So, what are we talking about today? Not dingleberries, I hope.
Nope. Well, it might eventually get there, but I think we'll start with kind of expanding on a topic that was in a fairly recent Lightning Strikes Twice video, where we really felt like 5 minutes was not enough time, and that is ignorance truly bliss? Like, are people happier being dumb, or like,
it's hard to believe we haven't talked about some of these things yet. Like,
I know
we almost, I don't know, 300 episodes in, and we're like still coming up with new stuff to talk about. It's like, oh, geez.
Things that are kind of like no-brainers, like, oh well, of course we should have talked about that.
So yeah, trying to think back to that Lightning Strikes Twice. That was a while ago, like 30 minutes ago or something. But we kind of touched on, in that Lightning Strikes Twice, we kind of touched on like how sometimes knowing things can be a little depressing, but also like knowing what you don't know can actually be exhilarating in a way. And so like, to say that not knowing something makes you happier is, I don't know, like, I think is a little bit too broad of a stroke.
Yeah, we kind of touched on like the two different sides of that like, there's the functional knowledge where, like, if you're building something or repairing something, knowing more is definitely beneficial. But when it comes to just the way things are or things existing, that maybe knowing more is not a good thing. That knowing how bad things are, right? Like if you're totally ignorant of how things work and you're just going about your life just carefree, you're probably better off than the people who know all the bad shit going on, or like how awful things truly are. And like, because it's like you could be aware of all these things but have no power to change them, and I think that could be not good. Although
So,
it depends, because like I think on the other side, knowing a lot about how things work can make you sort of more accepting, or well, because it's like a lot of people get really angry and or emotional over things that happen, events in the world, because they pretty much come out of the blue. Like, I don't know why that happened, but I'm angry because that happened. Like, well, no, it happened because there was a chain of events that led to that. There are a bunch of conditions in place that that outcome was inevitable. And so maybe it can give you a little bit of peace of mind having knowledge of the inner workings of the world, right? Like human society or physics or something like that. um that maybe like, I don't know. it, I don't know if it's better to know very little or to know too much. I think
so I
they
think it
both
really
have their
depends
pros
on
and cons.
the person.
Yep.
Like,
Yeah.
because I I was just thinking, like, about posing the question, like, how should we apply this to children, like in
Mhm.
school? I mean, like, obviously the general answer is that knowledge is a good thing, and it makes you more productive in society. It makes you more self reliant. Blah blah blah. Like, these are all good positive things,
Yeah.
but it is also more depressing in some ways because you have recess, you have your summer break, and then you get into adulthood, and it's like, wait a minute, those things are gone now. That's what
Hmm.
made me happy.
Yeah.
Uh, I think we talked about this fairly recently too, like
Mhm.
in an episode. Like, having more free time means more quality of life, and in the reality of just how most humans have structured their social uh, environments, that tends to be a rare occasion. So, in a long winded way, what I'm thinking from that is what kind of kid I was.
Hmm.
Now, I was always, and I'm a weird person. I was a weird kid. So,
Me
I'm a
too.
person that has a lot of satisfaction from knowledge.
Hmm.
And I figured out real early on that Santa Claus was like a total, like, setup.
Yeah.
Like, I had it all sussed, and I was the kid that was like proselytizing about it. I was like,
Mhm.
hey, wait, there is no Santa Claus. Hear me out. This blah 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 blah. I went
Mhm.
over all the logic, and all these parents were getting pissed at me, and it's like, no, 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 don't ruin it. I was like, ruin what? Like, this is awesome. Like, I figured it out. I solved a mystery. Like,
Yeah.
like, the, there's this thing that we've been lied to about all this time. And,
Well, and
and
actually, no,
the
you.
reality is you still get presents. Like,
Well,
there's no
yeah.
magic lost.
Well,
Like,
okay,
there's still the
okay.
gift of giving.
Yeah, no, you're right. And actually, Santa Claus is a pretty good metaphor for a lot of this. Like I was the same. I figured that out pretty early on. I wasn't out there preaching on my soapbox about it, but like I knew. But one of the nice things about being a human being is having the ability to imagine and role play and fantasize, and like reading a book, LeVar Burton, like it transports you into another world, even though it's a bunch of ink on paper, essentially. And even as an adult now, around Christmas time, I still go to the NORAD Santa tracker thing and watch it. It's fun. It's like,
Yeah.
and in my head, it's like I imagine all the little kids watching that and like, oh my God, Santa, here he is going across Earth and stuff. And like, there's a part of us, even as an adult, where make believe is good. And I think Mr. Rogers taught us that.
Knowledge does not obliterate that.
No, it doesn't. It can actually
People know Harry Potter's not a real character, but they still enjoy it. Like,
and they cosplay that.
Yeah,
like
and everybody grows up and finds out about Santa Claus, and like even though they perpetuate the even though they perpetuate the whole lie. I mean, let's call it what it is. The fact is, everybody figures it out, and it's not dying out. So, like, it's not a bad thing. Like, I think there are some parents out there that just say right off the bat, like, Santa Claus is this, made up figure, and it represents the spirit of giving, and not thinking of yourself for a time, and coming together and spending time with family and friends and loved ones, blah blah blah. Like, you can do all that, and still have the mythical character, but acknowledge it for what it is, and you don't lose anything from that. Like, in my opinion,
like mythology in human civilization is super important, like vital. In fact, it probably is part of what made us who we are today, and we still carry on talking about mythological stories, figures, and things like that.
Entertainment is a valuable vehicle for knowledge. Like, some people, well, everybody, something bores them, like, so to learn about something, why not attach it to something fun? Actually, there are studies showing that learning things in play creates synapses much, much faster than just rote memorization and so on. So
so for me, I taught myself programming in multiple languages in the context of making games. If I was in a school and I was like, that was the thing that I was doing just because I wanted to get a grade or a degree or whatever, it would have been not as interesting, and I probably wouldn't have learned as much as I did, because it was like self-motivation that, hey, I'm making these games and I'm trying to make them as good as I can and solve these weird problems and stuff like that, and it just pushed me like automatically to want to do that. And I think learning on its own is fun, like, or it can be. And well, okay, so there was a thought that I had, and I kind of got distracted from it. Hold on, let me put it down to
kind of went on a Santa tangent.
Well, it's related to Santa and mythology.
Well, I mean, that I'll just kind of rant a little bit. Like, the Santa thing is a fun way of teaching kids about generosity, and so, like, and Jesus is kind of a fun way to teach people about being kind to others and sleeping with prostitutes and like cool stuff like that, and so, like, I'm not against having those things, but I'm also kind of against, like, trying to, I don't know, like, hold up the lie. And, like, I don't want to make it sound like it bothers me so much that this is a lie, but, like, it kind of does.
I agree. Well, so I remember what I was thinking of, and that is, like, so I'm sure you have experienced this when it comes to, in the context of like science, medical related stuff, like TV shows and movies, errors that you see. Like, for me, it totally pulls me out of that world, of like the fantasy world, when it comes to things like technology and guns and technology. Movies and TV shows always do these stupid things And it's
Yeah.
like, dude,
People
why?
doing CPR in the 1800s.
Yeah. Like, and this is where it's like, I know lots of people who loved the show, like NCIS. They loved it. I can't watch it. It's almost unwatchable because it's so wrong. It gets so many things technologically wrong. And it's like,
Zoom in and enhance is not.
yeah, zoom and enhance. Yep. Well, yeah. And it's like, so maybe in that regard, ignorance could be bliss. Like if you don't know any better, it seems plausible to you, right? So you
Right.
could still
Yeah.
enjoy it. Whereas, like, anytime almost guns are one that like really boils my blood, because it's so easy to get it right, and yet over and over and over again, oh my god, they're always
Suspension of disbelief does actually tie in uh, exactly with ignorance is bliss.
Mhm.
That's exactly what's going on.
Yeah.
Like yeah, like that's a situation where you even know better, but you still take joy in seeing the fantasy and knowing
Okay.
it's fantasy.
Okay. I will. One of my guilty pleasures is a movie called Hackers. I love that movie. They actually now, although there's a lot of things they get way off base, there's a lot of things they actually get right, and things that are like totally on point. That most they're like these little nuances that only people in the know would even bother to put into this movie. So it's like, hey, somebody actually cared. And I guess maybe what makes it so fun is it doesn't take itself seriously. It knows it's a goofy, silly movie, and in that regard, it's like it's okay. But when you have shows or movies that proclaim to be realistic, but they're totally not, um, like only obviously if you're somebody who knows a little bit about a particular thing, that gets annoying. It's really hard to suspend disbelief at that point.
Well, okay, and then the other thing that this suspension of disbelief can lead to is innovation. Like, just look at Star Trek.
Yeah.
Like what you were just saying made me think about Star Trek. They had technical advisors to make it as real as possible, but of
Mhm.
course you'd still be like, well, physics says blah blah blah, and like, well, of
But
course it's a TV show in the end of the day, but like,
yeah, they're still trying to tell a good story,
but
and sometimes you got to fudge the numbers a little bit.
yeah, the important thing is look back at Star Trek and what inventions like definitely were blueprinted off of ideas, these fantastical futuristic ideas.
Mm-hmm.
Now we have cell phones instead
Yeah.
of communicators, like
Star Trek did inspire a lot of innovation, or just well, think about it. The world over, how many astronauts, cosmonauts, taikonauts, or whoever, like spacefaring
like a
people,
what or not.
taikonaut. They're the Chinese version of astronauts.
Huh.
Everybody's got their own. I don't know why. For whatever reason, they have their own sort of moniker. But like people who have been inspired to become astronauts, often it began with Star Trek. Like, the inspiration, the spark that lit that fire was Star Trek. Like that's
Yeah.
awesome. And in that regard, yeah, it's like you can look at Star Trek and it is very. I mean, well, at least like up until maybe I think Enterprise was about kind of the tail end of where it was like science fiction, and then it became a little more fantasy oriented after that, or action or something.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
the thread is still there. It's still connected.
Right. Yeah. They're not so much focused on uh, elaborating on the magic that made it what it is. They're just kind of riding the wave.
Yeah.
But like the die was cast basically. So like we probably wouldn't have gone to the moon without Star Trek. Like,
Yeah. Or even
well,
just like,
I
well,
mean, that did happen before, huh?
they happened concurrently, if I remember correctly.
But
The
I mean,
Apollo
like
program began before Star
the
Trek
whole
became
call
a thing.
for going to the moon, that
Yeah.
happened
Well, but I mean,
before.
people saw Star Trek and they wanted to become astronauts.
Yeah.
You know, like it it was a thing. The first space shuttle, the like the prototype space shuttle was like there was a poll taken of what to name it. You know, NASA had this poll, and
Mhm.
the overwhelmingly it was chosen to be called the Enterprise.
Yeah.
And there's a photograph of the cast of TOS there when they
Hmm.
like christened the shuttle, the
Hmm.
very first shuttle, which is cool. Like,
That is super cool. And I think it's awesome that like James Doohan's ashes are in space. You know,
mm,
like stuff like that is just like it's a cool symbology. It's a cool like effigy that pays homage to the fantasy, to the blissful ignorance that fed a whole lot of curiosity and innovation in people.
yeah. Well, and here's the thing: maybe there is a certain power in ignorance that like maybe somebody wouldn't even attempt something because they know how impossible it is. But if you don't know how impossible it is, you might be willing to strike out and try some crazy ideas to make something happen, whatever it might be. Um, and you might actually land on the answer. And so there is, I suppose, value in not knowing certain things. But of course, you have to know some things to be able to do something. So it's like, what is a sweet spot of knowledge versus ignorance?
Yeah, I mean, like the whole idea of uh, not knowing what your limitations are,
Mhm.
you know, uh, creating this boundless imagination. I think there is some value to that. Like people that don't understand why perpetual motion can't be a thing, or that heat loss is kind of an inevitable thing. um, they aren't really thinking outside those boxes. But
Mhm.
the people that are like, why though? Like, why couldn't it be that way? Like, it's not intuitive. It may be
Yeah.
how we understand physics now, but like, it doesn't seem impossible.
Mm-hmm.
Like, like it should be that something like that could be recycled back somehow. Even
No,
at a
you're right.
loss of its own. Like and people I think create their own fences, and they're like, this is what we know. We can't go outside these boundaries. There's no point in even entertaining it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, there actually is. Even if you're like, well, that would be a great idea if we could do this, but we can't because of that. But then you think of a different way, you know
Mm-hmm. Well,
whereas you wouldn't have gotten to that point if you were just like, fuck it, let's not even think about that.
I agree. You're right. The journey is worth the effort, because you may end up coming across some novel idea, concept, solution,
Mm-hmm.
whatever. And the thing is, I don't believe. I mean, yeah, like perpetual motion stuff. Like, okay, on paper, it's impossible, but I don't think it is truly impossible. I just think it's really, really difficult. And maybe there's some really, really simple thing, like one cool trick that will make over Unity a thing. But how are we gonna like? Maybe we'll discover that. And wouldn't that be amazing if it was discovered? Because that would change the world, like in a profound way. And
Right,
so
like
it's
there's
worth.
like an armpit for everything. There's like a point where things bend and go a whole other direction that you weren't thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where discovery lies. You know,
Yeah,
like
well,
you're like,
there was
oh wait, we totally thought this wasn't possible. Now it is. And like
there was
then
a
you have
point
new avenues.
there was a point in time where humans thought that flight was impossible.
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh, there's no way. And you know, people were building all these flying machines and dying and crashing and stuff, and nothing worked except maybe hot air balloons. That was about the only thing. But like actual winged flying machines. And yeah, it was centuries. I mean, I think Da Vinci had some concepts for flying machines way back in the day. So
I
I
think it
mean,
was more
yes,
like a hang glider, but still. Like,
I think it was more like a helicopter sort of concept.
oh yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but here we are today. It's ubiquitous. Like nobody thinks about hopping in a plane and flying somewhere. Like, yeah, there's planes everywhere. Look at the flight trackers. Like at any given moment, there's hundreds of aircraft in the sky, thousands probably. Like, yeah, it's just an everyday thing. But yet you go back a little ways, and most people who knew things, men of science or whatever, like they said, oh, that's impossible. That can't happen. Man wasn't meant to fly, you know? And now it's like, yeah, like I've actually thought about, I, I might put a little bit of effort into building myself an ultralight, like because just for a project, but I love the idea. But yeah, you could like,
For a second, I thought you meant fleshlight.
oh, no, I've got a couple of those too. No, that's not kosher for this.
Demonetized.
Yeah, exactly. Oh man. But there are a lot of things that people think are impossible. Well, space flight is one of those. It in the span of a century, we went from like barely being able to fly. I mean, the Wright brothers happened in like what was it, 1910 or something, in the 1910s. And then by the year 2000, we had the ISS being built.
I mean, there's people alive today that, you know, like a passenger airplane on the scale that we have them today was like unthinkable, you know. Um, you know, they were all like these tiny little charter planes and stuff. Yeah, like it's amazing to look back at what a short time span, you know, innovation has produced.
Yeah.
And if ignorance were bliss, I don't think that could be a thing. You know,
Right.
like
You're right.
I don't innovation couldn't really happen if you were just like, you know, like at least if you equate bliss with complacency.
Well, yeah. So, okay, there's the side of the average person, and then there's the side of the creator,
Right.
the innovator. And yes, of course, everything that we create is built on things we created before. All of it, whatever it is, be it engineering, you know, machines, any kind of technology or art, like music and stuff, that they're all derivative. So you do have to have knowledge of what came before to be able to carry on, to keep moving forward. So, but yeah, man.
So there's, you know, like the average person, I think, is of the ilk where they would think if it's not broke, don't fix it. But then there's the people who aren't in that ignorance is bliss camp where they're like, well, it's working, but could it work better? You know, and that's what drives us as a species, to evolve, well, effectively. You know, like,
you know, you're right. And so like I said, there's the average person, and then there's the creator side. And I think, you know, there's the everyday person who's like fine just pushing a button and watching their sports ball and you know, ordering fast food or something like that. They don't know or care where it comes from. They just content to consume. And then there's the creators who oftentimes are madmen. like crazy people. Like, you know, you get a little nuts when you're innovating and creating stuff and experimenting and trying new things. Um, and maybe that's the kind of the balance of society is you have the like the mad scientist essentially that's creating all the stuff behind the scenes, and then you have the everyday person who's just using that creation in an everyday context. Like, just think about it. Like, most people use their phone, their smartphone, not even considering what is in there. It's a sheet of glass essentially with pictures on it, and it just does things. And when it doesn't do things, they get frustrated because they're like, well, it's supposed to do the things that it's supposed to do. Whereas people who know how things work, it's like, yeah, oh yeah, there's a whole system underneath that, and the development of that too. Like, how did we get there? Like, there's a whole generation now, whose whole life, they're adults, their whole life exists within a world when smartphones were there. Like me, I remember rotary phones. Like,
Yeah.
you would
Oh yeah.
like, and you
Well,
had to remember somebody's phone number and stuff like that.
And you had to rent those
Yeah.
from the
Yep.
telephone. They were all the same phone.
Yep.
Everybody had the same giant black brick. You know, like,
yeah. And then there was a time when
like 20 pounds.
yeah. Well, there's a time when phones they didn't exist either. And like telegraph was a thing. And then before that, like, or radio too. That, like,
Do you think if there was some, like that episode of Star Trek The Next Generation where they all had their memories wiped and they were like, how did we get here? Who are we? What are we doing? And they had to kind of piece it together, reverse engineer it. Do you think?
Oh, and who's what was his name? McDuff?
Yeah.
Who's that guy?
Do you think we could do that today? Like, if everybody just forgot how everything worked, could we produce smartphones? Could we, like, so
no. In fact, if we forgot how to do things, if we forgot how, like, all of that, we couldn't even make a pencil.
Mm-hmm.
It would be almost impossible. At least not like a production pencil like this.
Right.
Doing this would be impossible without the knowledge that came before. Yeah.
Well, and I mean, you can point to a variety of factors for why that might be. Like, we'd have an episode, I think, on right to repair.
Mm-hmm.
Like something like that would be, like carrying on the knowledge, the underlying knowledge for how we got to where we are today. Like that's the other side of this coin, right? Like, there's ignorance is bliss, but then there's also like the bliss that comes from understanding the world.
No, you're right. I was actually just going to touch on that like, I appreciate this pencil because I understand the engineering and the history and centuries of development and knowledge that went into making this. Most people, they would just buy it and they would use it and sharpen it and throw it away when they're done. But like, every little thing I look at, and I don't just see a thing, I see the history, the lineage of that thing and how it got there.
Right.
And I feel blessed, I suppose, to have lived during the time, especially technologically speaking, when things went from very primitive to very advanced. I remember when I was a kid, there was a little program called Eliza, an AI counselor, and essentially it would just feed back stuff that you've written to you and ask questions. It was not AI at all, but I mean, it had the appearance of it, and some people thought they took it seriously. Now we have actual AI. I have my AI assistant, the Rabbit R1 that I carry around all the time, and it's far more advanced than Eliza.
One interesting aspect of ignorance is it's it has a tendency to stick around,
Mhm.
even though it's kind of common knowledge. So, like a pencil, for instance,
Mhm.
everybody says pencil lead, even though they know full well it's graphite.
Yep. Yeah,
But
yeah,
like,
you're
what
right.
else do we call it? It was just a hunk of lead surrounded by wood back in the day. There was no
In,
point to give it a name.
in fact, early days it was like just lead with nothing, and you'd get your hands would get covered in lead
Yeah.
particles and
Like,
stuff.
what do you want to call it? The pencil urethra? Like,
Yeah.
like
Yeah, and it makes sense in that regard to well, for the sake of common communication, I suppose. It's like, okay, well, I guess we could
but I'm okay with stuff like that because
Mhm.
it etches the history into the artifact, basically.
Yes. No,
So
you're right.
it reminds you where you came from. Like,
Hmm.
it reminds you like what got you to that point. Like,
Well, actually, so interestingly, recently a girlfriend and I watched the movie Cloak and Dagger from the 80s. Um, and the central premise of this movie, like it's focused on a video game cartridge, specifically Cloak and Dagger from the Atari 5200. Um, but in that movie, they kept calling it a game tape. They called it a tape. And everybody, literally everybody called it a tape. And it's like, it is not a tape. But prior to that,
yeah.
for quite a while, tape was the thing. And actually, like long after that movie came out, even into the 90s, people would call like NES and SNES cartridges, they'd still call them tapes
Yeah.
because
Well,
you used to use tape.
right before we were recording, my wife and stepdaughter, we were playing some Nintendo Switch games. My wife blew on the SD card.
Yep. Yeah. Oh man.
Kids today, man, they don't know.
They're missing out. You don't know what we used to go through, man.
And she swears it works. I don't know, maybe. But
It could, and in fact, imparting a little bit of moisture to the contact surfaces might also work. Of course, we all know with the NES in particular, the 10 nest chip was the culprit, um, and degradation of components, specifically resistors, because it was like a timing circuit that the cartridge had and the NES had, and that timing had to match precisely. And so as those
okay, we don't all know that. I have no idea what you're talking about.
so blowing on it would pretty much do nothing, but you fidget around with things enough and it would start working eventually. um but yeah, like, see, that's the thing, it's like
Oh, a magic door. Why did
yeah. Oh man. So it was a copy protection scheme that was basically faulty. That was the reason why cartridges wouldn't, you get the blinking screen and stuff. um but you know, I blew on cartridges and
Yeah.
they started working. So I
I
mean,
yeah,
at,
I
at
mean
the,
that some of that could just be like, how people think like, oh, I was just thinking about somebody the other day and they called me.
mm-hmm.
Like, I wonder if there's some kind of telepathic link. And a lot of the times it's just coincidence
Yeah.
that stands out because of its, like, amazingly unlikely correlation. And you think, well, that couldn't possibly happen, but of course it can,
Yeah.
and it does happen from time to time. So, and it happens to everybody enough to the point where they're all like, oh, I have that happen too. It must be a thing.
Well,
So
the thing
blowing on the
is,
cartridge thing,
yeah, well, humans are inclined to remember significant things.
Mm-hmm.
So the times you have a song in your head and you get into the car and start it up and it's not the song that's in your head, it's
Right.
unremarkable. You're not going to remember it. But there's that one time where you have this song in your head and you get into the car, turn it on, and the radio is playing the exact same song. And you're going to remember that. You're going to think, wow, that's a big deal. But it's like, okay, that ignores the thousands of other times you got into the car and started up and it wasn't like that.
Okay,
Like,
wait. Some of this could be cognitive bias where you like hear something and then you forget that you heard it. Um, my parents' house, where my room was, I don't know exactly what it was, the way the tree was, and we had a TV antenna in the tree, and I had a fan in the room because it was like always hot in that house, like terrible ventilation. So I would be sitting on my bed and I had the stereo there, and I would have the stereo off, right? But it was tuned to 99.9 KISW,
yep.
Seattle's rock. and and I would be sitting in my bed just like thinking about maybe I'll drive to McDonald's or whatever, thinking about what I want to do. I had the fan going, it was summer. And the fan is oscillating at whatever sound frequency it is. And I noticed like a song would come into my head, but it would come and go with the fan.
Huh.
And then I turned the radio on and that was the song playing. Like I was picking up radio signals from my fan.
Well, there is
the little things like that can creep into things and just kind of be like the explanation for the unexplained.
Well, I believe that there is more to the story myself. Like I think a lot of stuff is nonsense. That like
to the second though, like the song was in my head and I turned the radio on and it was like what? Like
so
it was.
There could be an explanation for that, and like there's a lot of things that are possible, like, but
like we were talking about earlier before we recorded with the earthquake machine and tuning fork therapy and stuff, like sound waves are like a physical thing,
yeah. So are radio waves.
Yeah. And so
it's possible
those could totally bounce off of the oscillation of a fan,
Well, and it could be some kind of cascading thing where like a butterfly effect sort of thing, where this little tiny, we can't detect radio waves. They're around us all the time. But maybe we can in certain circumstances. If the situation is just right, where a thing might be able to be affected potentially by, say, like a little input of energy, a little oscillation might cause it to resonate. And maybe that's something you might notice. It could be that fan. It was like a one-off that no other fan could do that. But it just so happened that fan with that weather condition, the amount of humidity and temperature, it was able to be affected by things.
Well, here's the one thing I can't explain is why it was whatever, even though the radio was off, whatever it was dialed to was what I was picking up. So I don't know how I don't know how stereos in the mid 90s were built and how
I do.
So I wouldn't be able to explain like how that is, but I'm sure there is a physical,
No, in the 90s in particular, if you don't have digital tuning, if you had old style analog tuning where you turn the knob and it pulls a cord that moves the little needle, but also,
I mean, this was digital, but
I mean, it's possible that like, because a radio oscillates like when you tune to a particular frequency, the system is essentially physically tuned. Well, in not non-digital tuning, like it is moved into a like structural position to sympathetically oscillate with whatever frequency you're tuning to. So even if there's not an amplification circuit connected to it, like it's not powered on, In theory, I suppose it could be
I,
that. Well, it could also be that maybe there's something completely different. It has nothing to do with the radio. It might be us,
I have
humans.
a radio nerd friend. I should ask him about that. Like,
Yeah.
because that's always stuck with me as something like super interesting.
Mhm.
Even though, like, even at the time, I was just like a dumb teenager, but I was still able to conceptualize like a physical real world explanation for how that could work, even though I didn't fully understand how to how it worked or how I could even replicate it.
Well, but
But the fact that I had come across that at some point, if there was a nuclear fallout and people were only using like AM radio waves to communicate, I could probably be like, you know what, one time, and then use that non-ignorance in a blissful way
Mhm.
to open my mind enough to opportunities to find a way to communicate with other people.
Well, but even if you don't know specifically how the radio works, you can still detect correlations between things.
Yeah.
Like, oh, the radio's tuned to this fan is going, and like this song is playing.
And that opens your mind to the possibility that it can be replicated,
It happens more often than I think people realize.
which makes you wonder about things that people perceive, like
Mhm.
Bigfoot, UFOs, whatever. Like,
Ghosts.
yeah, there can be other explanations, but sometimes it's hard to think of the other explanations. So, are there like does should that open our mind to other possibilities?
Yeah, well, and like I said, there's more to the story in many cases, and I don't think we should dismiss things that sound outlandish simply because we think there's no way to do that. Well, if we did that
Funny how this
all
is
the
going
time,
into woo territory.
I know. Well, and it kind of should. But if we did dismiss things that sounded outlandish and just never bothered, well, we wouldn't have airplanes, we wouldn't have spacecraft, we wouldn't have computers. Um, there's so many things that we literally are living in a magical time if you think about it. And this is where knowledge of how things work and the origin and the history of development of particular things, appreciating it, it's like, man, this is such a magical time. We are capable of doing basically magic. you know like,
Yeah.
think about it. If we had, say, like a minivan, a time traveling minivan that could go back 1,000 years, and we stuffed it full of all the shit that we have today, like all the coolest things, and we went back 1,000 years, we would be gods. We'd be indistinguishable from gods.
I don't know a lot of minivans that can hit 88 miles per hour.
Okay, well, a DeLorean, but I'm thinking about the volume. We need. How about a DeLorean towing a trailer or something? But like, I mean, seriously, think about it. Like it is like magic.
Yeah.
This world that we have, and it's probably been that way throughout history. The people who live in a particular time period, we can go back and think, oh, the 1800s and the 1700s and the year 200 or whatever. They were far more advanced than people 1,000 years younger than that.
Right.
And well, then Star Trek TNG touched on that. I think there was the Proto Vulcan episode where
The
there was
Picard.
the Picard, yeah. Yeah, and I can't remember her name, but like, he was trying to explain to her, the like, well, your people live in huts. Did you always live in huts? And she's like, well, no, we slowly over time, we used to live in caves, and then this and that, and um the about talking about the bow, Like, oh, hey, you can kill a hornbuck from far away, whereas your ancestor cannot. So you would appear like a god to them.
Right.
Something as simple as a bow.
Can we just acknowledge for a moment how dope Picard was at diplomacy? Like when he was faced with a situation where he could not help but break the Prime Directive, he was still an ultimate diplomat about it.
Yep.
Like,
Yep. Oh,
he was
yeah.
like, he was like, well, I guess I just have to explain like how technology evolves, and
Yep.
in
Transport
terms they can understand.
transport this person to board and show her planet from orbit.
That
Well,
might be a little overboard, but
yeah. But it worked, sort of. Yeah. Oh man. Well, Picard was really good at breaking the Prime Directive. I will say that. But that's the thing. It's like, man, this is well. So I don't know. I'm trying to contemplate whether to go in the woo direction or the technological direction, and I kind of feel like they're both intertwined in a way. Like there will be a time, because quantum physics, that like all of this will blend together. And it almost is there right now. Like, look at what we have. It's like fucking magic.
well, yeah, like I mean, we were talking about how radio waves operate in the physical world, but it's still something completely invisible to us.
Mm-hmm.
Well, why couldn't thought be operating on a particular frequency that could be tapped into as well?
Well, actually, yes, it can, because your brain uses chemoelectrical stimuli. So there's electrical signals. In fact, the little probes that that when they do brain tests, essentially those are picking up electrical impulses from your brain. So your brain does generate, like, there's electric current running through your brain, and if there's current running, there's going to be magnetic fields generated. And potentially there could be other things that we don't really fully understand, like maybe there's some portion of your brain in some way that creates radio signals, but even just electromagnetic fields, maybe it's possible that you could send a thought to another person. And
there's tons that we don't understand. There's tons of stuff that we know exists, and we can even explain how it works, but we don't necessarily know everything. Like, one of my favorite examples is proprioception. Like how I mean, I'm looking at a Zoom screen right now, so I can, of course, like, cheat and look, but I know there's a table back here somewhere, right? Mm-hmm. Like, and I can search for it and find it by being like, oh, it wasn't there, I need to go a little further. Like, stuff like that is not just touch. Like, there's something more. So when I was studying ninjutsu, one of the tests that you have to pass to get a black belt, and I mean, I didn't go this far, but I saw a lot of my friends go this far. You kneel down, close your eyes. The sensei stands behind you with a sword and then tries to kill you with it, and you have to dodge. Of course, it's not a real sword, but like, if it were, and you pass the test, like, theoretically, were it a real sword, you could have escaped death without seeing or anything, whatever you want to call it, like hearing or feeling the air move or whatever it is, whatever sense that is, it's a real thing.
It's the force, really.
Yeah.
I've experienced that many times. They say we have like 5 senses, which is bullshit. We have dozens easily.
Tons more.
Yeah. But like, even just
What do you think
spatial
being
awareness.
hungry is? You know, like
Well,
that's a
but like we have the sense of spatial awareness, like where
Mhm.
our body is, like where my hand, I can close my eyes and move my hand around. And like if I know this table, this desk is here, I can close my eyes and I
That's
know,
proprioception. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Gravity. When you're in an elevator, you feel gravity. That's a
Hmm.
sense. You
Oh
know,
yeah,
like
there's so many different senses, and I believe there's senses that transcend like the obvious. Uh,
yeah.
well, so as an example, because you were talking about ninjas, um, and this ties into that. So when I was working at this industrial robotics company, um, we had to clean out a warehouse that we had with a bunch of stuff in it. There were these huge racks with, we were storing things and they wanted to get rid of it all. So we had to kind of pull it down from these racks that were like 3 stories up and everything, and put it on trucks and stuff. Anyway, so this young kid who I worked with, he was all the way at the top trying to pull some stuff out of a box. And as a joke, like I'm standing down at the bottom looking out towards the roll up door. Um, and as a joke, he thought, oh, hey, I'm going to drop this like heavy ass metal thing on Eric's head. Um, yeah. So he just dropped it. And I knew something was incoming. And without even like thinking about it, I leaned back and caught it. And he's like, the fuck? Are you some kind of like ninja? Like, how did you do that? And from that moment on, like he totally respected me. You know, it's like I did something totally impossible. Yeah.
Yeah, I totally have moments like that. Like I'll I'll be disabled by pain walking with a cane or something, and then totally have these fast reflexes and like catch something without even looking.
Mm-hmm.
Like and I'll just coyly be like, I'm a ninja, you know.
Well, and that's the thing, is like that points to like, because I've had many experiences like that. I think I've told you the dice story, right?
Mhm.
um that like me and my friend, I'll just briefly recount it for those who haven't heard it. Me and my friend were playing Monopoly. We got really bored, and decided to change up the rules, and we got bored with the change up. And then randomly, I'm like, took the dice, and I'm like, hey, I'm gonna roll a 7, and I did, and I called every roll like 12 times in a row, not even thinking, just said a number and I rolled it. And it was then I
Look,
started,
virus.
yeah, yeah. Then I started thinking about it, and then I couldn't do it anymore. But it's like, that's impossible. That number, like how 12 times in a row? That's impossible. Statistically, you should not be able to do that. But I did it.
Yeah, when it comes to statistics, I don't think impossible is a word. It's just a matter of like how probable is that?
Mm-hmm.
And you know, like it could happen. It
Well,
absolutely could happen.
my point is basically, I think there's more that we don't understand. There's a bigger picture out there,
Hmm.
and there's yet more things to be discovered. Like, okay, sure, within physics and science and things, we can deal with this, like the things that we can observe and detect and modify. But I think it goes deeper than that, honestly, in my personal opinion.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and like that would explain things like UFOs and ghosts and stuff. I don't think they're totally outlandish. I don't think
And
that's
yeah,
like impossible to exist.
the idea of calling something woo bothers me a little bit in that capacity. Like, you know, someone will be like, how can you, you're a scientist, how can you even entertain that as an idea? And it's like, I mean, it's not impossible.
Mm-hmm.
It like if something is explained away by coincidence, it is just as likely that it has a physical explanation
Mhm.
for happening for a reason.
Well, and
Like, well, not okay, not just as likely, but like,
yeah,
you know what I mean. You know,
it's
like
still on
if
the table.
there's a reason to say that it could just be chance, there's also a reason to say it could not be chance.
Well,
It's
okay,
just the
but
likeliness of which is the case, you know.
well, this is where I'm coming from. Is like when you have a pattern of unlikely coincidences occurring with a certain frequency, then it's worth investigating.
Yeah.
In
I
my
mean, everybody's probably done this where like they've had math homework and they've gotten the correct answer the wrong way. You know, like
well, okay, let me just do a brief aside and tell you about my story about getting uh, the right answer the wrong way. Um, so I have back in the day when I was going to high school, I sucked at math, and I had this little pocket computer, the Tandy PC6, little programmable, basically a calculator, but it could do programming and assembly and basic. And so I was in algebra class, and I still suck at algebra. I definitely did then, but I thought, hey, you know what? Why go through all the trouble to do all this legwork when I could just write a program to solve these equations? So I did that and like breezed through the work that needed to be done, and you had to show your work, right? So my method of showing my work was I wrote out the program that I'd written, um, and the teacher, he's like, well, you know, technically you're correct and you did show your work, but it's not the way that we want you to do things. But it's like, well, I got the right answer. Like, isn't that what matters?
that that is an interesting question. Like, if I were a teacher, I would totally be like, I would give bonus points for anybody using innovation, anybody going
Yeah.
above and beyond. And I've had teachers like that, you know, like
Mhm.
I in community college, I had an exam in molecular biology, and one of the questions was about stem cells, and I went and like you had like this much room on the top of the page to like go into it, and the rest of the page was blank because it was like the last question, and I filled the page with information about stem cells because I just knew it, and I got like, I forget, like 7 extra points, to the point where I got like more than 100% on the exam.
Nice.
And it's
Well,
like that's awesome because like it reinforces having extra knowledge. It reinforces having thinking outside the box and all that
no,
stuff.
I totally agree. Like extra credit for novel thinking, I think is
Mhm.
important because is it really learning if
It should
you
matter how you learn, and
well
if whether you learned or
well
something or not, you
is
know,
it
like,
is it really learning if you simply do what you're supposed to do?
right.
Just follow the instructions. Like
Yeah.
everybody does that. Anyone
You
can
can
do that.
write with a pencil and call it pencil lead, but if you don't know why it's called pencil lead,
Yeah.
like, you know, what is that good for? You know,
Exactly.
it matters to have knowledge. Like, so I mean, ultimately, ignorance is not bliss, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I
I
think
mean,
it can be. Well, maybe okay. Maybe this should have been something put at the beginning, but the nice thing about being ignorant of something is that you don't have to contend with a lot of different variables. You don't have to concern yourself with a lot of information. It's like, hey, the sun rises and the sun sets. There it is. I don't need to know why or how that happens.
there it is.
And maybe there's a certain amount of contentment in that you're not wasting time or consuming your mental resources thinking about that stuff. But there's also a certain amount of satisfaction in doing that, in solving problems and answering the question of why. And I don't think we're ever going to find an end to that. Like that is an eternal human state of being. Like, we will always be inquisitive, no matter how much we know. There's more to know, and there's more. Well, fucking quantum physics. You know, like that'll be a like millennium long quest. You know?
Oh, jeez. Wow, there's a lot to tackle with the idea of whether or not it's objectively good or bad to have more knowledge. But like, I have to say, like, the stuff we've covered has got to be one of the most awesome episodes ever.
I know. It's like, Jesus. And we thought we were going to run out of ideas before we ran out of songs. Oh, man. Well, this is like season 6, and we're just now on this one.
Yeah, we're almost even halfway through season 6 already. Like,
that's crazy.
Unbelievable.
Yeah. And I feel like there's so much more that we could cover in this particular realm, but I think we've gone far enough for now. We don't want to overwhelm people or ourselves.
Well, I'm not entirely ignorant of my bladder, so I think enough beer and rum has been consumed here that it might be a fine point to say that ignorance is indeed not as blissful as a rum and coke.